Hi, we are here with Kenan Buhić. How are you doing, Kenan?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for talking to us. And we're going to be talking about a research paper that Kenan has done that really touches upon a lot of extremely interesting things. Attention as a metric, a thesis, in fact. And what university was that for?
That was for a German business university called WHU, Otto Beisheim School of Management. Yeah, I did my master's studies there. The final thing that I had to do before I graduated was to write this paper on attention as a metric, and that was in collaboration with Meta.
And what led you to that subject? What was your first introduction to attention as a metric, as something that was a valuable measurement in advertising?
That's actually a really good question. So the way it works is that you choose which kind of chair you want to write for. And so I wanted to write for the chair of digital marketing. But at the time that I applied, I had no idea that I was going to write for Meta. And I also didn't have any idea that I was going to write about attention as a metric because, quite frankly, we had never covered it in class. It was something completely new to me. But they told me, hey, it's super relevant. And so they gave the task to me. So that was essentially me coming in cold, not having any exposure to it before, and trying to figure out my way around it and maneuver around the landscape of literature, reviews, etc. And on that topic.
So you obviously dove headfirst into it. You've talked to a lot of people in the industry. What are some of the most interesting things that you took from it? Things that you've obviously been on some panels that you've talked about. Like, what are some of the best takeaways?
There's a lot to unpack. So the way I structured my thesis was in three parts. So the first part was literature reviews and then read up on that and come up with my own conclusion. And then the second part was to actually interview our experts in the industry. And so I guess the key takeaway I would have from the literature review part is that there really are no definitions that can be used and that I could base my work around. So what I had to do was I had to look at how marketing literature defines attention, but that wasn't sufficient in my opinion because sometimes there is no definition used in papers or there is a myriad of different definitions used in papers. So I really didn't have a working definition. So what I decided to do was to take a step back and look at attention from a broader lens and look at papers in psychology research and in neuroscience research, and then try to make sense of it before I eventually returned back to marketing journals and try to get a better understanding on how they view attention. So that would be my main takeaway from the literature review, that there are not a lot of papers, and in those papers that exist, there is really no working definition and no one really knows what attention is. They do experiments that measure attention, but also the experiments they do differ. So that would be my key takeaway for the literature review. As for the expert interview, I interviewed a total of 9 people. Some people were coming from the industry, others were coming from big tech, and someone were coming from ad tech. And so everyone had heard of attention in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, those people who work in the ad tech business, they are super enthusiastic about it because it's new and this is something that could potentially revolutionize the way digital marketing is done.
So you bring up through the literature and probably talking to people that one of the issues that the entire industry is trying to solve is standardization of exactly what is a definition of attention that everyone can agree upon. But as a concept, it's approaching the idea that viewability, so whether or not a ad was shown on screen, is sufficient enough for marketers that are much more interested in performance. Is this leading to business outcome? And so do you suspect that for those that maybe weren't as enthusiastic as you say, that there's a concern that leaning into attention makes them rethink whether things they're doing are successful or not, because viewability when viewed next to attention just isn't as powerful?
The main thing that people fail to see based on the interviews that I had is how attention connects to business outcomes. So if we were to have industry reports and literature showing that, hey, having attention as a metric that we track and it correlates or causes business outcomes, then I think more people would be at ease at incorporating a new metric that is beyond just viewability or any other metric that they might find favorable. And I just want to add to that is, like, we're talking about attention right now, you and I, and we kind of think, or we assume that we're talking about the same thing, but that isn't always the case. So I just want to point out one example. When I was talking about attention, I was viewing it as an input metric, right? Did people watch the ad? I was talking to this expert from that perspective, and he was like, Kenan, to be honest with you, I see what you're trying to do. I see where you're trying to guide me, but I don't necessarily agree with that structure of attention. So he saw it as an outcome, meaning that if I do an ad, how much attention does that ad generate? And then he would track that, such as media coverage, social media coverage, and he would think of that as attention. So you would have attention as an input, and I actually made a model of it where I tried to encompass these two different views, where you have attention as an input and then also attention as an outcome. So I think it's a very, it's too great of a metric to be able to be standardized in any meaningful way as it stands right now. And so I think the challenge lies therein, and try to get some consensus on what it actually means and how to track it. And also, what does it mean when something has a lot of attention in terms of business outcomes?
So what you're saying is attention is an umbrella for various types of attention, whether they're inputs or outputs, that can mean different effects or are in different parts of the journey of someone consuming an ad and then the subsequent action that they might take or not take.
Exactly.
It's obviously a very interesting read. It's 124 pages, I think. What would be and everyone should read it, because there's a lot in there. There's a lot of graphs, a lot of data. What are the three things that were enlightening to you that would be helpful to them?
We can start with the first. It's just bridging the gap of knowledge between measuring attention and business outcomes, because that correlation or causation even is not clear to everyone. So since it's such a new concept, I would start educating people on the power attention as a metric really has. Point number two, I would think, would be to understand that there are different perspectives when talking about attention and what it entails. And I also think that it's not worth just settling for one definition or one thing that everyone is measuring. And so looking at these different ad tech companies, I think you have very smart ways to measure attention. Some of you measure it through actual, eye measurement. Others do it through Wi-Fi, basically looking at, while that ad was playing, and we know what ad it is because we have a device that is able to track that, and I can see your internet activity if you were on the phone while the ad was playing. And then you kind of create an estimate or approximation of attention. I think it's super interesting. And I think the creativity that you show in industry goes far beyond that, which is shown in literature. So I would actually encourage you to stay innovative and come up with these different solutions on how to possibly measure attention. But then that also goes back to remember to always peg it to key strategic objectives that a company might have. So whether that is to increase awareness or whether that is to drive sales and actually show that it works. And so for a third point, I think to come up to speed with everything that is going on, this sounds like a sellout, but I would really read part number 2 of my master thesis, because there I kind of go into depth with all of these different perspectives. And I think it creates a pretty good picture on how the industry views it in general.
Anything else you wanted to add, from your voluminous research and, the conversations you've had?
I mean, there are a lot of key takeaways, I think. So reading up on the conclusion part, I think there is still a state of confusion in the greater industry. And I think that also holds true for the industry that are the agencies that are dealing with attention as a metric, right? But I always go back to say, and I think it's the most important thing, it's just showcasing that attention leads to profits or some kind of goal that the customer or end customer has in mind. And just showcasing this, I think, is really important for attention to manifest and become a sought after metric. And so right now, I think there is a lack of trust in it. I think a lot of people have heard about it. They don't know a lot about it and they don't trust it. So establishing this and really showing that, hey, this is a way better metric to track than other metrics that you might be tracking, just because we have seen that it produces these results and it's more reliable to track.
Well, thank you so much. This was extremely illuminating.
Thank you a lot. And I think there's a lot of golden nuggets that are to be found in the paper itself. I mean, as you stated earlier, it's 124 pages. And so if you don't have time and don't want to read 124 pages, I would recommend that you look into part 2, which is the expert interviews, because I think there's a lot to get from that. So that's about 24 pages or so. So it's a quick read, but I think it offers a lot of value. And so that is what I would recommend people. Thank you very much for having me on. I hope that I could be of some help. I don't work with attention metrics on a daily basis. I did write about it for 7 months last year. So it's, I want to thank you for this opportunity regardless. And I hope that some of you find it valuable.